We don't know the answer to that, but
that's a good question.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Are there?
I don't know.
if they were programmed to say no, would that be okay?
Well, wouldn't that just make it even more open to?
Oh, it's
a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a minefield. It is a minefield.
Shall we move on to cats?
Yeah,
shall we move on to cats? All right, 5 away from 5. Now, Cat Lover says the plan to ban felines was hidden. This is from a piece from RNZ. Was hidden by the Southland Council. We are talking about the tiny settlement in the deep south of Maui, west of Bluff. Cat Lover, Nico Jarvis, has SPCA rescue cat Bugs, rescue cats. They are Bugs, Monster and Rascal, who she says has made a huge difference to keeping the large numbers of mice down. But proposed new rules will require all cats in Maui to be neutered and registered within 6 months and would ban any new cats after the 6-month period. The council says it sent notices to everyone in town, but at community meetings only 3 said they received letters about it. What do you make of it, Jackie? The pest management plan says the rule against owning domestic cats was to stop them being released into the wild and adding to the feral population. But the small town of Maui, no more cats.
Oh, I think that's ridiculous. As long have your cat spayed, have it neutered, and have your companion animal, or 2. I think more than 2 is crazy cat person territory. But I have 2 cats, so that's.
Oh, so you're a cat person, right?
And and mine are useless at catching mice.
What's their names?
Gypsy and Charlie.
Okay, Gypsy and Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah, and they have a curfew. I have a cat door with a curfew on it, so they can only get outside between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. So that's my contribution to.
Do you agree with Jackie?
Bird life safe.
It's over the top to ban cats.
Yeah. I mean, sure. I wasn't in favour of Gareth Morgan's proposal back when it was.
Neither.
I do feel a little bit sorry for the council here because I feel like whenever the council tries to consult anyone, it's never enough. There's never been enough council consultation on any topic in the history of the world. No matter. And I feel like
that's a T-shirt.
This lady's pest management strategy, like bush pest management strategy, it's keeping the mice down. I feel like you haven't done a proper study here, lady. Like, it might have kept the mice down, but it's probably killed 2 kakapo and it's currently maiming a native lizard.
And only 3 people that got the letter, is that right?
Yeah, she says that Bugs, Monster and Rascal have made a huge difference. So she would know because Bugs, Monster and Rascal well, there are they? But look, to quote, feral cats are the ultimate predators in New Zealand, killing birds, eggs, lizards, fish and frogs, and in some cases, wiping out seabird populations. So your 2 cats, what are they called?
Gypsy and Charlie. They both had their operations straight away.
They are ultimate predators.
Oh, if you saw them though.
Full disclosure, I have 2 cats as well, Benny and Lana.
I have a ragdoll and a Siberian, and they are just, they're useless at catching things. So,
are you going to keep them?
Am I going to keep them? Of course.
You've heard the story.
They're little furry people. I just think, the council just need to say, look, if you're going to have a cat, it needs to be spayed or neutered. It's as simple as that. Don't ban cats. That's ridiculous.
Oh, but this seems like a very sensitive area down in this town. I mean, you think that your cats are nice and they seem nice, and I have 2 cats, but I know in my heart of hearts that they are evil. They are evil beings, and they are merciless killers.
A lot about the previous story. Yes, there are male sex robots, and apparently they're well received.
Very funny.
Another person says,
terminology.
Another person says, what do you think a vibrator is, Wallace? And a lot on capital gains tax as well. Pete in Dunedin says it's not the question of tax equity, it's the fact that politicians will use the increase.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, 27 years after Susan Burdett was violently raped and murdered, Malcolm Rewa is finally found guilty in his 3rd trial. We hear from Susan's brother as well as another of Rewa's victims. Auckland Council puts the brakes on Lime scooters after 155 incidents across the country since October involving locked wheels. The e-scooters have been temporarily suspended. $350 a week for a so-called DOS house. Chocker Motels mean work and income offer an 81-year-old pensioner a room in a boarding house. In her words, the place is absolutely bloody awful. And we'll have much more after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The police are pleased the jury in Malcolm Rewa's third murder trial reached a guilty verdict this afternoon. Rewa has been tried twice already for the murder of Susan Burdett, but the earlier juries couldn't reach a verdict. Minutes after today's guilty verdict was read, Detective Superintendent Dave Lynch told media it was a welcome decision.
I'd just really like to acknowledge all the witnesses that came forward to give evidence during the trial. It's not easy 26 years later coming back to relive some traumatic experiences, so I really want to appreciate the time that they took in assisting the trial team prepping for this trial and the evidence that they gave.
Dave Lynch also acknowledged the Crown lawyers and police team for the 2 years spent getting the matter ready for trial. Rewa will appear for sentencing next month. The judge who sentenced an Auckland sports coach to a lengthy jail term for sexually abusing boys says his risk of reoffending is low because he is now an outcast and would not be trusted by his community again. Alosio Taimo has been sent to prison for 22 years with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years for abusing 17 boys over a period of 30 years. The Crown prosecutor asked the court to consider preventative detention for Taimo, but Justice Simon Moore said while the crimes were unprecedented, that would be unnecessary.
Without doubt, you have completely destroyed any sense of trust you previously enjoyed within your community. I expect you will be totally and permanently ostracised. At the very least, none of your community will ever trust you around children again.
Justice Simon Moore. The man who killed 6 people and injured 27 others when he drove at high speed down a busy pedestrian mall in Melbourne 2 years ago has been sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 46 years. James Gargasulas received 6 life terms for the rampage in Burke Street. The judge described his actions as callous and cowardly and said it was one of the worst examples of mass murder in Australian history. Farmers have joined the opposition to proposals for a capital gains tax put forward by the Tax Working Group yesterday. The wide-ranging changes to the tax system the group is proposing cover second houses, business assets, most shares, land and farms. Mid-Canterbury farmer David Clark called the proposed capital gains tax a tax of jealousy and envy.
It's wanting to tax people who have worked hard and built assets and invested carefully. And there seems to be some idea that they want to socialise that tax into bumping up benefits and things for people who either can't or choose not to work.
David Clark. The Minister responsible for New Zealand spy agencies says comments from the American Secretary of State will have no bearing on this country's approach to Huawei. Mike Pompeo has told Fox Business News the US is warning other countries not only of the security risks of dealing with the Chinese telecommunications company, but that doing so could risk working alongside the US. Spark is still deciding whether it will submit a revised proposal to the GCSB in hope of partnering with Huawei to deliver 5G. The proposal could end up in the hands of the Minister Andrew Little, who would have the final say.
New Zealand's security and intelligence relationship with the US and indeed with other Five Eyes partners is based on what we contribute to that relationship. It's not based on an expectation of compliance and acquiescence.
Andrew Little says New Zealand law dictates the Spark proposal be considered independently of any other influences, and that's what's happening. The Auckland Council has decided to temporarily suspend the Lime scooter trial amid concerns about problems with the brakes. Several people have been catapulted off the scooters by a braking fault that randomly locks up the wheels. Earlier this week, Lime told Auckland Council it was caused by a software glitch, but a software update has been rolled out. Auckland Council and Auckland Transport set an ultimatum of midday today for the company to prove the fault was solved. The council says Lime told them today there have been 155 irregular braking incidents, 92 in Auckland. They have resulted in 30 injuries. The east coast of the country is being warned to brace for a big drop in temperatures over the weekend. The remnants of tropical cyclone Orma moving past the country, bringing with it rain, strong winds and cold temperatures. Met Service meteorologist Rob Kerr says most of the country will be affected by the rain and strong winds, but the east coast will also have a big drop in temperatures.
So we're looking at the likes of Christchurch hitting a maximum of 28 today, and maybe only a maximum of 15 on Sunday. similar story for like Napier Hastings today, 30 degrees, and then on Monday only sort of 18, and then a similar story further north. So places that are in high 20s today, as we go through the weekend, will struggle to get past that 20-degree mark.
Rob Kerr says Nelson, which would welcome some rain to dampen hotspots, will largely miss out. Authorities in Queensland are warning people to stay out of the water all weekend as Tropical Cyclone Orma whips up very rough seas along the state's southeast coast. The storm has been downgraded to a Category 1 cyclone and is lying about 700 kilometres northeast of Brisbane. All beaches on the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coasts are closed. It's 5:05. The Highlanders coach Aaron Major believes his former All Blacks teammate Brad Thorne has transformed the Reds since taking charge of the Queensland Super Rugby side. After a narrow first-up win over the Chiefs, the Highlanders tonight host the Reds in Dunedin, with the visitors playing their first game of the 2019 competition. The 59-test All Black Thorne was renowned for his hard-nosed style of play, and Major says he can see that in the Reds as his old teammate begins his second season as coach.
I think he's really transformed them. They've turned into a real tough team to play against. They compete very hard at everything, and that was Thorny's style of play, and I'm sure he's transferred that into his coaching philosophy as well. So we expect them to be on for 80 minutes. They're a team that don't give up. There's plenty of guts and grit on their side.
Tonight's match kicks off at 7:35. Black Cap selector Gavin Larson accepts spin bowler Ajaz Patel has every right to feel hard done by after missing out on the Test squad to play Bangladesh. The Canterbury leg spinner Todd Astley is poised to return to Test cricket after a tough couple of years with injury and comes into the squad at the expense of Ajaz Patel, who played both tests against Sri Lanka in December. Larson says Patel has performed well, but Astley is a better attacking option and also bats higher up the order. Meanwhile, a short time ago, Australia were 76 for 33 after 18 overs in the opening Rose Bowl one-day match against the New Zealand women's cricket team in Perth. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Country Life visits Opotiki kiwi fruit growers Catriona and Mark White, who believe in full employment down on the farm, even on wet days. The Broken Heartbreakers are this week's Friday Night Live act, and Matt Cowan introduces this week's element, silver, which goes with a sonic tonic dedicated to cutlery, from silver spoons to forks and twists with a knife. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, rain becoming widespread later today with some heavy falls, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. For Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Scattered rain, more widespread and heavier in North Auckland and Eastern Bay of Plenty overnight and early morning. Clearing tomorrow but remaining cloudy. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waited Upper, scattered showers, rain in Waited Upper tomorrow evening with possible thunderstorms. Waitomo to Wellington, scattered showers today, some heavy especially about the Tararua Range. Cloudy periods tomorrow. For Nelson, Buller and Westland, cloudy periods, isolated showers in Buller and northern Westland today. Marlborough and Canterbury, a few showers developing today, mainly about the ranges, turning to rain tomorrow evening. Fiordland, Southland, Otago, mostly fine today, a few showers about the south coast, spreading elsewhere tomorrow with increasing cloud. And at the Chatham Islands, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow evening. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 5. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna, and I'm Lisa Owen. You're listening to Checkpoint. Nearly 27 years after Susan Burdett was killed in her South Auckland home, Malcolm Rewa has finally been found guilty of her murder. It brings to a close a dark chapter in New Zealand's legal history spanning nearly 3 decades. 2 previous juries couldn't decide whether the serial rapist had killed Susan Burdett, but today a 3rd jury took just a couple of hours to reach a verdict. Our court reporter, Annika Smith, was at the High Court in Auckland.
Place Malcolm Rewa before the court.
Malcolm Rewa entered the dock in a dark grey sweatshirt and stared at his feet.
Mr. Foreperson, will you please stand? Members of the jury, have you reached a unanimous verdict? That is a verdict on which all 12 of you agree.
Yes, we have.
On count 1 of murder, do you find the accused Malcolm Rewa guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
It's a word that's been nearly 27 years in the making. After 5 trials and after Taina Porter served more than 2 decades in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Malcolm Rewa has finally been found guilty of Susan Burdett's murder. The serial rapist had already been convicted of raping Ms Burdett in her Papatoetoe home in 1992, but juries in 2 separate trials couldn't decide if he also murdered her. It was the Crown's case that in the course of raping her, Rewa took a baseball bat Susan Burdett kept for her own protection and clubbed her to death. It told the jury other rapes Rewa carried out, and the fact his DNA was inside Ms Burdett's body meant they could be sure he murdered her, and they were. Former police officer turned private investigator Tim McKinnell, who campaigned to clear Taina Porter's name, was thrilled.
For Taina, this was a really important day. My very first meeting with Taina several years ago now, 10 years ago, this is something he talked about happening. It wasn't about him. He was, of course, wanting to get out of jail for something he hadn't done, but at the forefront of his mind was Susan and her family.
Taina Porter was twice convicted of Susan Burdett's rape and murder on the basis of a false confession. His convictions were quashed by the Privy Council in 2015, but it wasn't until 2 years ago that the police and Crown began mounting a third prosecution against Rewa. Mr McKinnell said despite Taina Porter's wrongful conviction, today was all about finally seeing justice done for the Burdett family.
It's undeniable that we had some difficult times in our relationship with the police and the way they conducted some of their inquiries in the early part of our work, but we're not here today to dwell on that. What really impressed us is the last 2 years of work. They've had a dedicated police team. Gareth Kays and his team have been fantastic, and that's where our focus is.
Detective Inspector Dave Lynch said police and prosecutors worked hard to achieve the result.
Police welcome the jury's verdict today in convicting Malcolm Rewa of Susan's murder. I'd just really like to acknowledge all the witnesses that came forward to give evidence during the trial. It's not easy 26 years later coming back to relive some traumatic experiences.
Malcolm Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers, spoke to his client after the verdict was delivered.
Well, disappointed would be an understatement, but he's pretty calm about it. He always felt he was going into this with a likelihood that it would be hard to get a fair trial.
Rewa has always maintained he was having a secret relationship with Susan Burdett. He claims he supplied her with ecstasy and said they shared a pill and had consensual sex at his house the night she died. Mr Chambers said Rewa thought the jury reached their verdict too quickly, having deliberated for 3 hours and 45 minutes.
I think Mr Ray was just questioning how a jury gets through 400 pages of evidence in less than 3 hours. I think the trial process was fair. I think the judge's summing up was fair. He has concerns that a jury came in so quickly.
Mr Chambers wouldn't confirm if Rewa would pursue an appeal, but one thing he could say was that his client was sticking to his story and that Ms Burdett's family had got it all wrong.
Depends on how much they knew their daughter. I've been with Mr Rewa for 2 years. I haven't seen him lie once to me. Everything that he said to me panned out as the trial progressed.
Tim McKinnell says he would never expect Rewa to take responsibility for his crime.
He's a serial rapist and a murderer, and monsters, in my view, aren't born, and so there is probably a story to tell from his point of view in terms of how he ended up being in this position, but that's not to take away from the pain and suffering he's inflicted on so many over decades.
Malcolm Rewa will be sentenced in March. Atuiti ko te mātua ko Annika Smith aho.
Jim Burdett is Susan's brother. Here's what he told Checkpoint after the guilty verdict was delivered.
The right person is in the right place for the right reason. That's the nub of it. And it wasn't pleasant hearing Susan's character besmirched by somebody, by Rewa. So I'm glad that's over, and I'm glad that's been disproved. There is a sense of finishing something that started 27 years ago.
And that was Jim Burdett, Susan's brother. Rhonda McCarty was raped and bashed by Malcolm Rewa 2 weeks before Susan Burdett was murdered. She was in court while the convicted rapist gave evidence at his third trial. She says he was totally unbelievable and the jury saw that as well. Rhonda told me she always believed he was capable of murder.
When he attacked me and when I went through that experience, I knew he was capable of killing me. And you can read about his, what he did and some of the details, the attacks and things, but until you've actually experienced it, it's really hard to explain to someone how you just know. And I've always had that feeling of, I know that he's capable of this. And, when he pushed me through the 2 front seats of my car, I actually got a glimpse of him, and I couldn't really make out his face or any of his features, but I could see the outline of his face. And one of the things that really terrified me, because I knew he was one of the more violent kinds of rapists, was, does he think that I can identify him, and will he kill me if he thinks that I saw his face? So that was playing on my mind at the time. And I remember when I found out about Susan Burdett, and there was discussion about whether she may have known who he was. And my first thought was, well, gosh, is that why she was murdered? Of course, I would never know, and no one's going to know. But it made me think back to what I was thinking at the time that he attacked me, and what my fears were at the time.
Because Susan was killed just a matter of weeks after you were raped by Malcolm Rewa.
It was only 2 weeks. I can remember when the police called me. I had not really even been thinking about whether they would ever catch him, because it was 4 years later. By that time I was moving on. And when they called me and they told me that he was my assailant, and they'd identified him through DNA evidence, and then they talked about the number of other women, and they said to me, he was being charged with Susan Burdett's rape and murder. And as soon as I heard the word murder, the first thing that crossed my mind was, oh my God, I was right. It was just that. It was quite chilling at the time. And, I asked them what the date was, and when they told me the date and I realised it was only 2 weeks after he'd attacked me, that really, it's the first time I think in 4 years since I'd come out of the ordeal that I thought, gosh, I'm so glad I'm alive. It reminded me to be really grateful at the time.
You sat through his evidence, didn't you? What did you make?
A little bit.
Yeah. What did you make of what he was saying, his demeanour, the way he was?
Well, I sat in on Tuesday afternoon. It was a very short session for about half an hour, and he, first of all, I actually walked in I was a little bit later than the other people coming in, and he was just taking the stand, and he caught I caught his eye, and it was the only time I've ever actually seen his face in person and looked him in the eye, because that didn't happen when I testified. But when he sat down and he was giving his evidence, there was a lack of confidence in what he was saying. You could tell it wasn't true, and a lot of what he was saying wasn't true. And I was just listening very intently and with complete curiosity at the story that I was hearing. And the feeling I got from watching him was he was a man who was really desperate to hold on to any hope for freedom. It was like he was just trying desperately to get one last chance to feel like he could get out of prison, because, obviously if there had been a different verdict, he would still be able to hold on to that hope, and I think a guilty verdict takes away that hope. So I just felt the desperation.
He said some pretty horrific things in regard to Susan Burdett and the story he told, that they were having a relationship. What did you make of that? It's not. I just thought, well, how awful for the family to have her character, being discussed like that. I can't imagine what that's like. But I was sitting there just fascinated, thinking, this is just the most farcical story. That was how I interpreted it. It just didn't ring true to me. He presented at various points as being quite a frail older man. He was using a cane. Do you believe the way he presented?
I didn't see him as being frail. Yes, he's using a cane, but he didn't look frail to me. He doesn't look anything like, the man who he was, 20-something years ago. But no, I don't know. I don't really know how much he's changed. I couldn't really ascertain that, if he has changed at all. But I certainly didn't see him as being frail.
And in the end, the jury saw what you saw, a man who was fabricating wild stories.
I think that's one of the most satisfying parts, is that it was such a quick verdict. So they clearly weren't buying what defence was selling. And I think that alone as well is also very satisfying on top of the verdict, is that it didn't take very long. And I think there is still some of the journalists were still thinking that there was a possibility that there might be a tiny percentage, there might be a hung jury until Tuesday. And then, like I said, I was only there for 30 minutes. It was a very short session. And I walked out of there just feeling like there was no way that there could be any other verdict. No possible way.
Should he die in jail?
I expect he will. It doesn't matter how sorry you are. I really think that there's no way that he deserves to ever have his freedom again.
And that's Rhonda McCarty, who was raped and bashed by Malcolm Rewa 2 weeks before Susan Burdett was murdered. And if you're wondering, Rhonda applied to the courts a couple of years ago to get her name suppression lifted so that she could speak openly about what had happened to her. It is about 20 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen to hear your feedback. Let us know your thoughts on any of the stories you're hearing on the show today. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. In the past hour, Auckland Council has temporarily suspended Lime Scooter's licence. Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer, Dean Kimpton, told a media briefing there have been 155 reported incidents of locked wheels, 92 of these in Auckland since the Lime Scooter trial began in October. He says there's been 30 reported injuries across the country, 19 in Auckland alone, and he wasn't prepared to compromise public safety.
We appreciate the amenity that these e-scooters offer as an innovative transport solution, but we're not prepared to trade on that safety dimension. We consider that to be non-negotiable. We've requested from Lime the following additional assurances. Incident records over the period of the trial as it relates to this unexpected locking issue. And this will also highlight the effect of a solution that they have put in, referred to as a firmware upgrade to address the unexpected locking issue. We need satisfaction that that firmware solution has addressed the issue that the scooters have been occasionally experiencing. We expect them to provide a full update on the licence extension conditions that came out a few weeks ago. We've asked them to agree to report to Auckland Council and Auckland Transport on a 48-hour frequency of all incidents and meet weekly with the relevant staff in our organisations to share with us Lime's response to those incidents, their analysis and what they're learning from it, to build that back into safe operations. We've asked and they have agreed to use Exponent. Exponent is a specialist international consultancy that does root cause analysis of these mechanical type issues, not just mechanical but other types of issue, and have Exponent provide a letter to both of our organisations that provides us the assurance that that root cause analysis that led Lime to release a firmware fix has robust methodology, that the findings and the recommendations that they as an independent advisor to Lime have been taken into account and their observation as to the success of that fix. This letter we've asked to be provided on Monday is a target time. They have accepted Council will also appoint an independent reviewer as part of our assurance of the safety of their operations, and they have agreed to give us access to their operations and their data so that we can be satisfied that the records that they're maintaining and the fixes that we're expecting to see occur have been occurring. They've also accepted we'll appoint a reviewer to assess the more detailed work done by Exponent. That is commercially confidential, so we will use a third party to review that on our behalf. Lime has agreed with these conditions, and once we're in receipt of the information, particularly the report on Monday, and access to incident records, then we'll make a further decision on whether Lime's licence suspension will be lifted.
And that's Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer Dean Kimpton speaking to the media just a short time ago. It's still a little unclear at the moment whether the scooters, the Lime e-scooters, will be physically removed from Auckland streets over the weekend or whether they will be remotely disabled. Checkpoint will have more on Lime scooters and the impact of the suspension in other cities later on in the program. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the issue of Australia deporting New Zealanders who have committed crimes across the Tasman has become corrosive in the relationship between the two countries. Ms Ardern and her Australian counterpart, Scott Morrison, held their annual talks in Auckland today. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell, was there.
It's a whirlwind visit this year. Scott Morrison has foregone the normal overnight stay that former Australian Prime Ministers have opted for, most likely because he has more pressing issues back home. It's election year in Australia and polls across the Tasman are indicating it could be a tight race. So Mr Morrison will be keen for the photo opportunity with Jacinda Ardern, but at the same time wanting to avoid any criticism that he's visiting wineries on Waiheke Island instead of working in Canberra. After the customary photo opportunity for the New Zealand and Australian media in the Government House grounds, it was time to get into the formal discussions. As they sat down to the talks, Jacinda Ardern thanked Mr Morrison for making the trip, saying she realised it was a busy time in Australian politics. Mr Morrison replied, thanking Ms Ardern, but also acknowledging that today is the 8th anniversary of the Canterbury earthquakes. He says Australians grieved and shed tears with their Kiwi cousins on that day.
For us to be able to meet on that day, I think it's a sign of our friendship. And when it comes to these meetings, it's always families first, and we're family here in the Pacific and particularly in Australia and New Zealand.
On the agenda for the meeting was regional security and both countries' increased focus on the Pacific. Jacinda Ardern says the two leaders discussed areas where they agree, but also where they disagree, including on the deportations of New Zealanders.
In my view, this issue has become corrosive in our relationship over time. I made it clear that New Zealand has no issue with Australia taking a dim view of newly arrived non-citizens committing crimes. But equally, the New Zealand people have a dim view of the deportation of people who moved to Australia as children and have grown up there.
Scott Morrison was unrepentant when asked by reporters about the deportation of New Zealanders.
Our government has taken a very strong line, and when it comes to those who are in Australia, who are on visas. See, visas are not citizenship. Visas are provided on the basis of people being compliant with those visas, and that doesn't include committing crimes.
News today that Australian coal imports were being held up at the Chinese border were also the subject of questioning at the joint media conference. But both leaders were batting away any suggestion that their countries' relationships with China were under any strain. Scott Morrison says it's not the first time that there have been issues at Chinese ports.
There is no evidence before me or us that would suggest that it has the connotations that it has anything to do with anything more broadly than that. This happens from time to time, and we just work constructively with our partners in China.
Jacinda Ardern made a similar point, stressing once again that the China-New Zealand relationship is just fine. The two leaders have also met with business leaders before Scott Morrison heads back to Canberra tonight. Kei tamaki makaurau mō te hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
Up on Checkpoint, questions are raised over what checks MSD makes before placing clients in emergency housing after an 81-year-old grandmother finds herself paying $350 a week for what she describes as a DOS house. A 56-year-old former school rugby coach is sentenced to 22 years in jail and batten down the hatches. That's the message from the Met Service for the weekend. And we would love your feedback, so don't forget, you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, you can get in contact via Facebook, we're Checkpoint, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna with the headlines.
The man found guilty of murdering Susan Burdett believes the jury rushed to their verdict. Malcolm Rewa's lawyer says the convicted man told him it would be difficult for him to get a fair trial and that the jury came back too quickly today. Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers, says his client can't understand how the jury got through hundreds of pages of evidence in just a few hours. Rewa has already been convicted of raping Ms Burdett in 1992, but juries in 2 previous trials couldn't decide if he murdered her. Lime's e-scooter trial in Auckland has been temporarily suspended after safety concerns about the brakes. The Auckland Council says the scooters will be out of use this weekend until Lime gives further evidence they are safe. Several people have been catapulted off the scooters by a braking fault that randomly locks up the wheels. The judge who sent an Auckland sports coach to a long jail term for sexually abusing boys says his risk of reoffending is low because he is now an outcast and would not be trusted again. Alosio Taimo has been sent to prison for 22 years with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years after being found guilty of abusing 17 boys. The Crown Prosecutor wanted preventative detention for Taimo, but Justice Simon Moore said while the crimes were unprecedented, that would be unnecessary because he would be ostracised. The Minister responsible for New Zealand spy agencies says comments from the American Secretary of State will have no bearing on this country's approach to the Chinese technology firm Huawei. Mike Pompeo has warned other countries not only of the security risks of dealing with Huawei, but says doing so could risk working alongside the US. Spark is still deciding whether to continue its push to partner with the firm to deliver 5G. The man who killed 6 people and injured 27 others when he drove at high speed down a busy pedestrian mall in Melbourne 2 years ago has been sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 46 years. James Gargasoulis received 6 life terms for the rampage in Burke Street. The judge described his actions as callous and cowardly. Those are the headlines. I'll be back with more news at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And Nona is in the studio for the last time this week. Nona,
indeed,
Auckland Airport cut the price of charges to airlines.
Yeah, so there was a review by the Commerce Commission, I guess last year over the pricing that Auckland Airport charges airlines for landing aeronautical services. So the price of the runway and all these sorts of things, and they upped the prices beyond what the what the Commerce Commission would set as a benchmark or a record. Yeah, exactly. Now, Auckland Airport was above the mark, has reduced it somewhat, not to the level that is the benchmark, but they've argued that there's a big difference between, say, an $80 million upgrade and one that's multi-billion dollars. And we're talking about, a second runway at Auckland Airport, this sort of thing. They're saying, look, it's going to cost a lot of money to fund these things, and they're perfectly justified in the costs. So it's going to be a little bit less than the airlines were hoping for, but not as much as they, wanted.
Okay, so a property market,
But before we leave that, so Auckland Airport, they actually had a decline in their profit, and that was partly because of the value of their properties. So the growth in Auckland properties isn't as great as it has been, the value of them, and as a result of that, that hit their bottom line. So their underlying profit was up a little bit, but their bottom line net profit was down, I guess, 11%. Now, you've seen that through the Auckland and Christchurch markets too.
And speaking of property,
there you are.
You're saying here that Somerset, which is a retirement village operator, the shine's come off their bottom line because of a cooling property market too.
Also in Christchurch and in Auckland, so that their price, their net profit was down because of the valuation gains aren't as great now. So they fell 10.6% to $214 million. That was for a full year. But that's not put them off from looking for more properties. They're actually looking in Australia where the market has cooled substantially, and they think that there's some opportunities there to pick up some land in Australia. So that's interesting for Somerset to make that move to Australia.
And on the market generally, any movers or shakers that we need to pay attention to?
Look, Auckland Airport's share price rose like 1%. So even though the bottom line was down, overall the result was pretty good, and I guess the market was satisfied with that. Rose 8 cents to $7.42. Somerset's share price was also up, again, because it's only these property valuation gains that are really hitting the bottom line there. Up nearly 1% as well, 5 cents to $6.33. So overall, our market was very little changed. Asia's still worried about how things are going with these talks. Who knows which way that wind is blowing, right? Up now. We were We were a little changed, I say, up 8 points to 9,309. And our dollar is trading at 67.7 US cents. Now, we were dragged down there by the Australian dollar over the coal story that may or may not be an issue, according to the Australian Prime Minister. 95.4 Australian and 51.9 pounds.
Thanks, Nona. Have a fantastic weekend. I hear you're probably going to need a raincoat. Weather's not looking good. Let's turn now to the story of Doreen. Doreen is an 81-year-old grandma. She's also homeless and has been sleeping on and off in her car. This week, she asked Work and Income for help. Now, they tried to get her somewhere to stay. A number of the motels were booked up, so she says they suggested a guest house in Mount Albert, and they showed her some photos and some online reviews. The price, $350 a week for a room. Doreen thought it looked nice, and she assumed that Work and Income had already vetted the property. But the pensioner says the reality was nothing like the sales pitch.
Doreen is 81 years old, and this less than polished Mount Albert guest house is not where she expected to spend her golden years.
Absolutely bloody awful. In other words, I would call it a doss house. No, I wouldn't even put my dog in here if I had one. No thank you. For $350 a week?
A change in family circumstances means Doreen is homeless. She says Work and Income recommended this place.
How do I get into that? No handles.
The box stored in this double bedroom, the discarded headboard and the stray bits of wood around the place aren't hers. They come with the room. There's a piece of cloth stapled over a glass window in the door to the bedroom. Noise from the corridor filters through.
I don't feel safe here at all. I'd be scared. I would never sleep. I could not sleep.
The room is tired, and so is Doreen. It is a mission to get the window open. And then there's the curtain.
Yeah, let's give it a go.
That's great private, isn't it?
Doesn't really go the distance.
The shared bathroom is down the hall.
Excuse me, love. Where's the loo? Where's the bathroom?
I'm going to show you the bathroom. We have a big spring cleaner.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
There is a tidy shared kitchen too. Doreen went to Work and Income with a support person and says she was shown these lovely pictures by a staff member.
They showed me some nice photos on the computer, totally different to what I saw, what greeted me. And I thought, well, hell's bells, that looks good, you know, little kitchenette, table and dining room, chairs and that, and a small bed, and you know, and I thought, well, okay, that'll do. That's great.
But for this 81-year-old, the reality didn't measure up. Doreen says Work and Income staff told her she could look at the guest house herself before signing on, but she thought they'd vetted the property because they were suggesting it.
When I saw the room, the first thing that went to my head was, why the hell didn't Wins come and have a look at this for themselves? Because I said they'd be crazy to put anybody in this place. And that was my first thought. Those stupid buggers should have come and have a look to see what are they paying out money for. Oh, they don't give a damn.
Ricardo Menendez-March is with Auckland Action Against Poverty. He says Work and Income has a moral obligation to screen properties they are directing people to for emergency or longer-term rentals.
It is actually Work and Income's responsibility to take care of people. It is their duty to check whether a place is suitable. I don't think people should be expected to go through these extra hurdles just to realise that Work and Income offered them a slum place.
Move-in costs were 2 weeks' rent in advance, so $700, bond just over $1,000, an amenities fee of $200 to cover a mattress protector, linen pillows and a towel. Total deposit, $1,950. Doreen says her pension of around $400 a week is her only income. She had to borrow that money from Work and Income, and that means paying it back at about $20 a week. She'd like that debt wiped.
So if you find it hard to pay it back at this rate, we can have a chat about your situation and see how we can help. I think you've already done enough damage.
Auckland Council is currently investigating a complaint about overcrowded bathrooms at the lodge. We found a sign on the front fence signalling there'd been past disturbances here. 81-year-old Doreen won't be staying.
So where does it leave you? Where does this leave you? Have you got a roof over your head?
I've got my roof. My roof is my car.
You're kidding me, Doreen.
No, my car. I love my car. And I hate New Zealand. And I've been here over 50 odd years. And this is what they've done. They don't give a damn.
So your car, Doreen, seriously, your car, that's what it's come down to?
Yeah. My car and the lady that gives me the lazy boy now and again in her lounge. I drive round at night trying to get familiar with the roads again. You'd be amazed what I see at night. Find a nice quiet spot and chill out. Old age doesn't matter anymore. They don't give a damn. You know, you just cast to one side, oh, you're bloody old, get on, get on one, and I thought, no, I'm 82, I'm still fit, except that I've had brain surgery, had a tumour removed out my head. But I just feel let down.
And that was Doreen. Faraha Properties owns the guest house in Mount Albert where Doreen was placed. Its manager, Faraha Jubair, told our producer, Bridget Burke, there is a big difference between motel accommodation and a guest house, and her company works hard to provide a place for the homeless.
The first thing is the guest house. We choose this. We have chosen to provide housing for the less fortunate to help them, right? To reduce the number of homeless people on the streets. So firstly, we're quite offended how you're trying to question our pricing. Everything is fair. The room was a double room. It was completely private. It includes bills. Do you understand what a guest house is and how all the tenants leave all their lights on, their fans on, their taps on all the time? So that includes the bill prices, includes internet, a car park, because she had a car apparently.
Does it have a kitchen or a bathroom?
Do you know what a guest house is? So a guest house, if you look on the tenancy, it's a shared living space. Okay? So no guest house will have its own kitchen and bathroom. If a tenant is not happy with the guest house, there's many other guest houses which are extremely substandard, extremely violent. At least we keep all of that down to a minimum. We are creating a family environment. So the pricing matches that and the maintenance of the guest house. Have you seen the standards of the kitchen, everything compared to other guest houses? Wynn called us requesting us for a room, so we only had a double bedroom available. They said that is fine. So that is the rate for a shared room, $350.
And Viv Rickard is the Deputy CEO of MSD's Service Delivery. I asked him what responsibility MSD has to check out accommodation that it offers to people.
So firstly, it's hard to find places, and secondly, they've got choice in terms of the types of places that may be available. It's hard to find some accommodation in some cities. Auckland in particular can be quite difficult. So some people go into a whole range of different accommodation, which may not always be ideal, but it may be better than where they've come from.
I understand the difficulties with finding accommodation in Auckland. In the case that we're looking at, Doreen, she was presented by work and income staff members with an option for a guest house. She was shown pictures by your staff and the pictures looked good, and she was also given 4 reviews to look at of the accommodation. So they were pointing her in the direction of this accommodation. If you are doing that, should you not be sure that it's not, well, a DOS house?
I think it came down to just trying to find something for Doreen. I'm not sure if it's a DOS house. I'm sure these other people that are staying in boarding houses, there are a number of boarding houses throughout Auckland. But the first thing is that I understand my staff tried to make contact with other motels, which they did. They were unavailable. It got down to where is available for Doreen, and as a result, that was the first place they got to which was available. My understanding is also that she was asked, do you want to go and check out the place because here's what it looks like online. Our staff obviously were in Onehunga. They haven't been to the Mount Albert site. They don't, they don't visit every motel or every accommodation area in New Zealand. And Doreen decided to take that as a permanent place to stay, and I can understand why she might feel that way. If it's unsuitable, if it doesn't work, that's another discussion between us. To try and find somewhere else.
They gave her copies, sorry to interrupt you, but they gave her copies of reviews that were written about this accommodation. Did they know that 2 of the 4 reviews were written by staff members from the lodge?
I haven't heard anything about staff members writing reviews, but
But what I'm getting at is they gave her information which they had not verified themselves. They gave her pictures of the lodge that had been printed off the internet. They gave her reviews. So she was pointed in the direction of this place, which she describes as a DOS house. Her words, not mine. And I'm wondering, do you not have any responsibility to know something about the places that you were recommending and sending your clientele to?
Repeat again that, the accommodation that's available is, it's not plentiful. Number two, we do have a duty of care towards people like Doreen. I accept that 100%. However, in terms of finding the accommodation, we end up being the people that pay for it. We're not the regulator for it. They get choice about where they go to. I understood.
Should you not care where the taxpayer dollars are going, whether the taxpayer dollars are going on suitable accommodation or not?
Yeah, well, it's $350, I understand, a week, which is, in terms of Auckland prices, that's what you end up paying around Auckland. You won't pay that for a boarding house in other parts of the country. She tried other places. We couldn't get her into those places. That was the first place that had a vacancy.
So it's a last resort. You offered this up as a last resort, basically.
Well, we don't offer it up. We were trying to help her find somewhere to stay.
Well, you did offer it up because your staff suggested that as an option for her, so you are offering it up. You are suggesting certain accommodation to them, and you're giving them names of accommodation, so you are offering them up to the clientele.
I don't want to, it's not worth me picking at things. We have a duty of care towards our clients. I don't hide from that. But I reiterate that we end up paying for it. It's the choice of the person where they go to. We will try and help with that.
So you take no responsibility for the quality of accommodation. Will she get that money back?
If people get there and it's not suitable, please talk to us about it's not suitable. I understand that she has nowhere else to go to. It may be the place of last resort for her at the moment. There might be another place to go later for her. We're engaging with her in relation to that.
So will you pay her back she obviously had to take on some debt to get into this place, so she was going to be paying that back at about $20 a week to MSD. Are you going to wipe that?
I haven't looked at the actual. In normal circumstances, we will have things like we will advance bond, we'll advance other things. Then she will look at the total money that she's got in terms of her availability. There'll be some hardship things that may come in, but I don't know their exact figures.
So you can't say
how much of that is recoverable or not. But we'll follow our normal circumstances and ensuring that her and the other people we deal with get looked after appropriately. It's not easy.
$1,950. $1,950 of that is recoverable. So, given that she has indicated to you that this is substandard accommodation she wants out, will you waive that debt?
Oh, well, I think that's the thing that I'd really be keen for Doreen to go and engage with our people. I understand that that's what's happened. I respect her ability to go to media with Triple AP, who's a political piece in this. I respect that. I'm not hiding from that, but the reality is we're quite happy to engage with her to see what the circumstances are and see what we can discuss. But I haven't been able to do that. My staff haven't been able to do that. I think from the sounds of it, we're doing it through the media, so it'd be really good for us to engage.
Just before you go, one other issue is an email that's come through to Doreen's advocate suggests that part of the problem has been that there are events on in Auckland and there are no motels available. So is that due to the 660 concert this weekend that you're having to offer people, less suitable accommodation because all the motels are booked out?
We have problems right through the country at times when it's difficult to find emergency accommodation. It's not just an Auckland thing, it's not just related to concerts. There'll be times of the year, different events, where it's really difficult to find any accommodation, particularly at short notice.
And that's Viv Rickard of MSD. And if you're wondering, Doreen is being looked after over the weekend. She's got a few days accommodation somewhere else. And MSD has said that it is concerned about her situation and they'll do their very best to find suitable accommodation for her. Justice will be served today. Those are the words of one of the victims of school rugby coach Olusegun Taimore, who was found guilty of nearly 100 sex abuse charges against 17 boys. The crime spanned 30 years and involved boys as young as 9. Today, the 56-year-old was sentenced to 22 years in jail at the High Court in Auckland with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years. Joanna Mackenzie was at court.
Your offending, however it's viewed, is unprecedented in this country. The sheer scale is extraordinary.
Justice Simon Moore speaking at the beginning of Taimore's sentencing, which took more than 70 minutes to deliver. Before that, the court had heard from 7 of Taimore's victims, all of whom were visibly upset and at times struggled to get through their prepared statements. The victims' identities and voices are protected for legal reasons, but the words they uttered are powerful. 2 of the men said they are not victims, they're survivors. One called Taimore a monster and predator and said he'd classified himself as damaged goods and tried to take his own life. Another said he's faced his demons but forgave his abuser in order to move on with his life. One mother described how hard it had been to overcome what happened. She said she'd never hated anyone or anything as much as she hates Taimore. Another mother said she felt like she had failed as a parent. Following the families, Crown Prosecutor Jasper Rhodes described the abuse as unprecedented.
The harm caused by Mr Taimore, with respect, can't be overstated, and I think with respect we can see that in what we've heard this morning. The impact on the victims, the people involved in this, has been vast, serious, long-lasting, and as we've heard, it's something they will carry with them for the rest of their lives.
While the effects had been devastating, Jasper Rhodes said the victims were not broken.
These are strong, proud, clever, successful people who will overcome. And I think the message, sir, with respect, is that their success is in spite of Mr Taimore, not because of him, which is it seems to be the way that he thinks in the reports that have been prepared.
Justice Moore praised all the people in court for their courage and dignity throughout the whole investigation, trial and sentencing. He told Taimore he'd betrayed so many people and committed a gross breach of trust.
And the standing in which you were held by so many allowed you to commit these crimes over the nearly 30 years you did, because you knew the boys would never dare complain. And even if they did, they'd never be believed.
Addressing Taimore, Justice Moore repeated what many of the victims had told the court.
Each of your victims will feel only a small part of closure, but a lifetime of torment from another. No matter how many people will mentor, coach or befriend my son, regardless if I think there is good in them, I will never forget that looks can deceive.
The Crown had asked the court to consider preventive detention for the crimes, but Justice Moore said that would not be necessary. He said Taimore's risk of reoffending was low because he had now been outcast from his community.
Without doubt, you have completely destroyed any sense of trust you previously enjoyed within your community. I expect you will be totally and permanently ostracised. At the very least, none of your community will ever trust you around children again.
Taimore will spend at the very least 10 years of his 22-year sentence in jail, and he'll be placed on the Child Sex Offenders Register, which will prevent him ever working with children again. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Joanna Mackenzie.
8 years ago today, Christchurch was shaken to its core as a second major earthquake hit. The city's recovery has been slow, for some painful, and for many Cantabrians, earthquake insurance delays and mental health issues make it incredibly hard to move on. Even though some rebuild projects have been finished or are about to be completed, for some people that 6.3 magnitude earthquake might as well have happened yesterday. In total, 185 people died. Among them were Marie Faldesi's husband Ian, who was crushed beneath rocks while walking in the hills above Littleton. She was one of hundreds at today's service held at Christchurch's Earthquake Memorial Wall, which has the names of everyone who lost their lives carved into its side. Marie Faldesi told Christchurch reporter Conan Young about her daughter's hunt for her father after the quake struck 8 years ago.
Sarah took off at 3:15 to find her dad and brought a little flagon of whiskey, thinking he'd just broken his legs. She didn't actually get home till midnight. We did actually just think he's probably just broken his leg, because you assume earthquakes to be connected with buildings, not with rock or countryside. You just assume it to be something you see in a city.
And so she found him around midnight?
Well, she found him I think earlier. But it took a while to get his body out. Where it was down a ravine, really. So she didn't actually get home till midnight. A friend went and helped, and then I think the Navy, the young Navy ship was in port, and they helped bring his body out.
You've got to remember, all through this time, while your daughter was looking for him, there were aftershocks happening constantly.
Yes, yeah. She's an extraordinary young woman of 40, just not being worried, her and her dog, looking for her dad. So it was pretty horrific thing for anyone to deal with, because his body was all broken, and it's something, it's something she'll live with for the rest of her life, but it's giving her a lot of strength. And she won't put up with nonsense now, which is really good, which I like. She knows what's real and what's not real. And actually, they're not here today because they've all gone surfing to Sumner Beach. They didn't want to do any more of these memorial things. So, but I like to come in. I don't know why. I just like it, really.
And so, yeah, how's everybody doing? Like 8 years on now.
Very well. My youngest daughter's not doing well, and that's why she's got lots of mental health issues, and that's why I think that the Mike King Hope is absolutely wonderful. When you see it, everyone posting, all walks of life, it makes you realise something's got to change.
Do you sort of feel a bit of a connection with everybody here today? You've all I guess you didn't know each other before the quakes, but you've all got something in common now, haven't you?
Well, I was, because Ian died in the Port Hills, doing what he loved doing, actually, and he's in a place he absolutely loves. I don't have the same connection because most of it was connected with the CTV. But there are a few people who were very important to me, Man in particular, because I was feeling very isolated in Littleton, and Man was just wonderful and supportive. So that part is good, you know.
Good to have somewhere like this to come as well.
It's lovely. By the river, absolutely lovely. I was initially against all this money being spent on a memorial wall when people haven't got, water and sewage in the eastern suburbs, but I have to say it is lovely. And by the river, it's always lovely being by water.
And that was Marie Faldesi speaking to our reporter Conan Young at the Earthquake Anniversary Service in Christchurch. After 70 days on the water, Isaac Geeson has succeeded in being the first New Zealander to row solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Mr Geeson was rowing to raise awareness of suicide, having lost his auntie and 2 friends that way. He spoke to our reporter Laura Dooney from Antigua, telling her he was sad his epic journey has come to an end.
Yeah, I loved it out there. Just everything is just amazing, really. Just the small things, the small things in life that you start remembering, and you kind of take appreciation for as well, which is lovely.
So you weren't sort of gagging to get off the boat? You could have stayed out there a bit longer?
Yeah, I actually asked one of the sport boats if he could tow me out 60 miles again, just to go for another little bit of a row tonight. It's good wind, but no, not really. I was just enjoying it so much. Like every day, like every hour we're out there is just changing, and it's so nice just to try slowly adapt to it, or try to adapt to the conditions, and then you'll start getting some good wind finally by the end. So it started getting fun.
Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to do this?
I'm raising awareness for mental health, as I lost my aunt and 2 mates to suicide, and also for other people who've lost people to suicide. Just trying to raise awareness as you lose someone to suicide. It's just an absolute it's quite a horrible thing to actually deal with. And just trying to change the attitudes that, New Zealanders that we're facing, and Australians as well. Something that needs actually to change. And it's sad that people can't talk and listen to someone in need, or people can't talk if they need help. So yeah, definitely keep on raising awareness from now on, really, and probably won't ever stop. I'm thinking maybe climb Mount Cook and then snowboard down it, and then maybe row the Tasman, and then, yeah, probably the Pacific, either solo teams, and then if that all works out, probably the Southern Ocean.
It's kind of hard to imagine what it's like rowing for that long and being out in the ocean. I mean, I know it's hard to describe such an experience, but kind of, if you can, in a bit of a nutshell, what's it like?
Oh, what's it like? For me, it's just perfect, really. But you can say it's wet, salty, raw, beautiful. I guess that's the best ways of describing the ocean. Unpredictable, always changing, and the list can go on with just, words to describe it.
And if you're keen to find out more about Isaac's cause, you can go to his website, thebluerower.com, or The Blue Rower on Facebook. Time for just a little bit of your feedback before the news. Lime scooters, their licence is suspended at the moment. I am 60 years old, an enthusiastic Lime user. I'm glad Auckland Council is putting safety first. I'm also grateful, says Terry, that I have not been catapulted over the handlebars.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The man found guilty of murdering Susan Burdett has criticised how long the jury took to reach its verdict. The jury of 7 men and 5 women returned a unanimous guilty verdict today after deliberating for almost 4 hours. Ms Burdett was found raped and bludgeoned to death in her Papatoetoe home in March 1992. Rewa, who is 65, has already been convicted of raping Ms Burdett, but juries in 2 previous trials couldn't decide if he murdered her. His lawyer, Paul Chambers, says Rewa feels he may not have got a fair trial because the jury came back too quickly.
I think the trial process was fair. I think the judge's summing up was fair. He has concerns that a jury came in so quickly.
Paul Chambers says Malcolm Rewa has not decided whether he will file an appeal. The Prime Minister says the country's relationship with Australia is being corroded by Australia deporting New Zealanders with criminal records. Jacinda Ardern and Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison held their annual talks in Auckland today. Ms Ardern says they discussed areas where they agree, but also where they disagree, including on the deportations of New Zealanders.
In my view, this issue has become corrosive in our relationship over time. I made it clear that New Zealand has no issue with Australia taking a dim view of newly arrived non-citizens committing crimes. But equally, the New Zealand people have a dim view of the deportation of people who moved to Australia as children and have grown up there.
Scott Morrison defended the deportation policy but said Australia will continue to work through individual cases sensitively, and he again knocked back New Zealand's offer to resettle refugees and asylum seekers being held in offshore detention centres.
The Australian government has no plans to take up that arrangement whatsoever, and that is particularly now more pertinent on the basis of what happened in the Parliament last week.
Scott Morrison, Australia's Prime Minister. Lime's e-scooter trial in Auckland has been temporarily suspended over concerns about the brakes. Several people have been catapulted off the scooters by a software glitch which caused the wheels to randomly lock up. Lime told Auckland Council a software update had been rolled out, however the council gave them until today to provide more thorough assurances. This afternoon, the council's Chief Operating Officer, Dean Kimpton, said the concern remains and Lime's licence is temporarily suspended.
We appreciate the amenity that these e-scooters offer as an innovative transport solution, but we're not prepared to trade on that safety dimension. We consider that to be non-negotiable.
Dean Kimpton says the council will lift the suspension on Monday if it receives the safety assurances from Lime. Meanwhile, Lime's regional general manager has apologised to riders and the Auckland community for the problems. He says the company is confident the scooters will be back on the streets soon. A showdown is looming in Venezuela this weekend as the embattled President Nicolás Maduro continues to block foreign aid coming into the country. He's closed the border with Brazil and is considering shutting the border with Colombia, where the opposition leader Juan Guaido has gone to try and bring the aid convoys in. The BBC's Orla Guerin reports.
For Venezuela's opposition and for President Nicolás Maduro, the battleground is moving to the Colombian border. Pallets of US aid are ready and waiting here, with children's toothbrushes, tinned food and medical supplies. The opposition leader, Juan Guaidó, has promised to get the aid into Venezuela on Saturday, but has not said how. He has urged his supporters to converge on the border. President Maduro's troops are in position with orders to stop them. The stage is set for confrontation.
Orla Guerin on the Colombian-Venezuela border. Authorities in Queensland are warning people to stay out of the water all weekend as tropical cyclone Oma whips up very rough seas along the state's southeast coast. The storm has been downgraded to a Category 1 cyclone and is lying about 700 kilometres northeast of Brisbane. All beaches on the Gold and Sunshine coasts are closed. The Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, says there will be abnormally high tides and dangerous surf, and conditions will worsen throughout the weekend.
My clear message to families from Sandy Cape all the way down to Coolangatta is don't go camping, don't go boating, don't go fishing, don't go swimming and don't go surfing.
Queensland's Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. Waves of 10.5 metres have already been recorded at Point Danger on the Queensland-New South Wales border. It's 6:05. New Zealand are attempting to finish off what has so far been a good bowling performance in the first Women's One Day Cricket International against Australia. After winning the toss and choosing to bowl in Perth, the White Ferns reduced their hosts to 125 for 5. A short time ago, Australia were 179 for 6 after 37 overs. Meanwhile, the Black Caps selector Gavin Larson accepts spin bowler Ajaz Patel has every right to feel hard done by after missing out on the Test squad to play Bangladesh. The Canterbury leg spinner Todd Astle is poised to return to Test cricket after a tough couple of years with injury and comes into the squad at the expense of Patel, who played against Sri Lanka in December. Larson says Patel has performed well, but Astle is a better attacking option and also bats higher up the order.
Ajaz has been very unlucky. He's done nothing wrong. We just feel on balance we want to go with a more attacking option with the spinner, and wrist spinners, as we all know, are attacking bowlers, and Toddy Astle's fit. It's been a big part of our plans recently, and we're giving him a chance.
Gavin Larson. The first test starts in Hamilton on Thursday. The Highlanders are hoping to make it 2 from 2 when they host the Reds in Dunedin tonight. The Queensland team is playing their first game of the season after a bye last week. The Highlanders are coming off a narrow win over the Chiefs. And the Wellington Phoenix have re-signed fullback Louis Fenton on a new 2-year deal. The Wellington-born 25-year-old has revived his A-League career this season, starting in all but one of the club's 19 games after several seasons plagued by injury. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Dave Cullen wrote the book about the mass shooting at Columbine High School nearly 20 years ago. In Parkland last year, another one. But this time things were different. It gave Dave Cullen hope. And Julie Bindel has been campaigning to end violence and discrimination against women for decades. But a column she wrote urging feminists to ditch the makeup bag, well, outrage. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, periods of rain with heavy falls, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Scattered rain, more widespread and heavier in northern Auckland and eastern Bay of Plenty from later today to early morning. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers. Waitomo to Wellington and Wairarapa, scattered showers with heavy falls about the Tararua range today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with a few showers in Wellington and Wairarapa turning to rain at night. For Nelson, Bulla and Westland, fine spells. Isolated showers in Bulla and northern Westland today. Marlborough and Canterbury, a few showers developing mainly about the ranges, turning to rain tomorrow evening. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, mostly fine inland today. However, a few showers about the coast, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. And at the Chatham Islands, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow evening. It's 6:08 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint, and I'm Lisa Owen. Justice and truth have finally merged together. That's how the verdict that Malcolm Rewa is guilty of Susan Burdett's murder is being described. It's nearly 27 years since Ms Burdett was killed in her South Auckland home. Her family has endured 5 trials, and the wrong man, Taina Porter, being locked up for more than 2 decades for a murder he didn't commit. His conviction was quashed in 2015. Tim McKinnell campaigned to clear Taina Porter's name. He spoke to reporters after a jury found serial rapist Malcolm Rewa guilty.
We're thrilled, really, really pleased, primarily for the Burdett family. Susan's family and friends have endured sort of 27 years of hardship, and so finally today I think we've seen both justice and truth merge together finally, so we're relieved and pleased.
How much of a toll has this taken on the victims, do you think, and the victim's family, and also on Taina Porter?
The dealings we've had with Susan's family, they're very private people, and so it's been tough going. They've endured 5 trials and a great deal of uncertainty and some fairly difficult times in terms of listening to all the evidence. So it's been incredibly tough for them. We know that, and we've had, in terms of our work with Taina, we've constantly had them in our minds, and so the job the police and the Crown have done over the last 2 years has been magnificent.
Tim, your first job really was to try and clear Taina. How important was it for you then to find out who did it?
I spoke to Jim Burdett when we started working on Taina's case right at the very beginning and tried to explain our position to him. Jim was incredibly understanding. He had a lot of questions for us, but it was important for us that we acknowledged their position in this. It wasn't ever just about Taina. It always involved 2 people and 2 families, and that was Taina and Susan's family. And so you couldn't deal with one without the other. Our job was to represent Taina and help establish the truth, and we did that. And we did that part, and the police and the Crown have taken over and done the rest.
That's Tim McKinnell. He helped campaign to free Taina Porter for his wrongful conviction for the death of Susan Burdett. Dunedin City Council is following Auckland's lead and has tonight begun pulling Lime scooters off its streets. Auckland Council has this afternoon temporarily suspended Lime's e-scooter licence after revealing 155 incidents of locked wheels since the company's trial began in October. Of those incidents, 92 were in Auckland and 30 involved injuries. On Wednesday night, Auckland Transport Chairman Lester Levy told Checkpoint he wasn't aware of the scooter trial until he saw one of them on the streets, and he had serious safety concerns about them. This afternoon, Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer, Dean Kimpton, said he'd spoken to Lime's representatives and the scooters would be pulled from the streets immediately, pending a full incident report on Monday. He said public safety was now non-negotiable.
We've requested from Lime the following additional assurances. Incident records over the period of the trial as it relates to this unexpected locking issue, and this will also highlight the effect of a solution that they have put in, referred to as a firmware upgrade to address the unexpected locking issue. We need satisfaction that that firmware solution has addressed the issue that the scooters have been occasionally experiencing. We expect them to provide a full update on the licence extension conditions that came out a few weeks ago. We've asked them to agree to report to Auckland Council and Auckland Transport on a 48-hour frequency of all incidents, and meet weekly with the relevant staff in our organisations to share with us Lime's response to those incidents, their analysis and what they're learning from it, to build that back into safe operations. We've asked, and they have agreed to use Exponent. Exponent is a specialist international consultancy that does root cause analysis of these mechanical type issues, not just mechanical but other types of issue. And have Exponent provide a letter to both of our organisations that provides us the assurance that that root cause analysis that led Lime to release a firmware fix has robust methodology, that the findings and the recommendations that they as an independent advisor to Lime have been taken into account and their observation as to the success of that fix.
Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer Dean Kimpton there, and in the past half hour, the Chair of the Planning Committee, Chris Darby, has confirmed to Checkpoint the scooters will be physically removed from the streets tonight. In a statement, Lime says only 0.0086% of Lime scooter trips in New Zealand have been affected by the wheel locking issue. It says only minor injuries and a few fractures have resulted. The company has apologised to riders for the inconvenience. Open invitation to Lime to appear on Checkpoint. Would love to have you. New Zealand First is seeking its own advice on capital gains tax as 3 dissenting members of the working group call for a scaled back version of it. The tax working group announced this week that the government could raise $8 billion over 5 years by taxing land, shares, investment properties, business assets and intellectual property. But while the dissenting voices say a tax on the residential housing market is justified, extending it to business and intangible assets like goodwill is just too complicated. Here's our political reporter Jo Moyer.
Winston Peters says New Zealand First has an idea of what the appetite for a capital gains tax will be with business and farm owners in the regions, but says it deserves more than 24 hours consideration. The tax working group has proposed wide-ranging changes that would include taxing land, farms and most shares in business assets, including second properties, although the family home is off limits. New Zealand First has been vehemently opposed to a capital gains tax in the past, but Mr Peters says the minority report, a watered-down capital gains tax, is worthy of a closer look.
That minority report is worthy of study as well, and you're going to have a lot of people disagreeing or agreeing with the minority. I don't know what that proportion of the population might be, but we are seriously interested to see what the public dialogue says.
One of the biggest criticisms of a broad capital gains tax is how complex it will make New Zealand's tax system. The minority group says the government's responsible for tax compliance through the IRD, which is something it already struggles with. Winston Peters says it was Labour that brought a capital gains tax to the table at the last election, but it's a coalition government now. Despite New Zealand First's enthusiasm for referendums, Mr Peters has ruled it out on this occasion. He says he's interested in the substantive view of the public, not something that bolts out of the blocks early. One of the dissenting tax group members, Business New Zealand Chief Executive Kirk Hope, says there haven't been any conversations between the dissenting members and political parties yet.
I'm grateful to hear that, for example, New Zealand First think that the minority view is a good starting point, but we'll have to talk to everybody on this.
Farmers have joined the business community in its opposition to a proposed capital gains tax. Bay of Plenty farmer Alan Law says he would support taxing the capital gains of property speculators, but if applied to farms, such a tax could cause big problems for farmers and the economy.
I think the government have got to be really careful that they don't kill the golden goose. Not only do we need to have a vibrant farming sector that earns valuable export receipts for the New Zealand economy, we need to also keep our sector attractive to young people. And I know quite a few younger guys that are pulling the pin at the moment because farming's just getting too tough and they've had enough.
Federated Farmers has also slammed a capital gains tax as a mangy dog that will add unacceptably high costs and complexity. As for finding a political consensus, the Finance Minister Grant Robertson says that's the job of being in government and working with New Zealand First and the Greens.
In the end, we could have ignored this issue, walked away from it and said, well, there's no point. Actually, we want to make sure that we're respectful of New Zealanders, that we're making sure we do look at the big issues. We do try to address inequality. We do try to find fairness. That's why this report's been done. We now go through. It's not a straitjacket. We can take bits of it. We don't have to do the whole thing.
Winston Peters is frank about the fact it won't be easy to find a happy medium. He says New Zealand First is hiring its own experts to work through the details before drawing any conclusions.
Tax policy is never easy. As a famous song from Louisiana once said, tax reform goes like this: don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that man behind the tree. Nothing's changed.
From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
Alternative education centres have told the government they urgently need more money and more support to help teenagers that may have been kicked out of school. The Associate Education Minister, Tracy Martin, brought alternative education and activity centre providers together in Wellington today to ask them how the government can improve their sector. They told our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, they are struggling to cope with an ever-increasing number of troubled teens.
The government's promise of an overhaul for alternative education follows years of complaints about underfunding and rising demand. Activity centres and alternative education providers work with about 3,000 children a year and get $21 million in government funding. Joanne Hutt from Carmore High School says it's not enough, and in her town alone there are 35 young people wandering around with nothing to do because the local alternative education spaces are full.
I could go down the town basement and collect them up every day. So they're just hanging around, and obviously they are susceptible to older influences that are not so great, and there are crimes that are committed by groups of these kids that police can't really action because they're under 16 years old. So just a never-ending cycle, and we could nip it in the bud because they want to be in somewhere. They want to go. Please, missus, can I go to this AE? That'd be really good.
Nadine Rohe from Gisborne's Turanganui Akiwa Activity Centre says the government needs to let younger children into the system because there are too many that schools can't cope with.
We have an increasing amount of children, year 7 and 8s, even younger, who have been excluded from school. I had a year 8 student who had been excluded as a year 7 in term 2, so he's been out of school for a long time. He's got nowhere to go. His parents were saying, can you please come to the activity centre? Activity centres are only for year 9 and up. That's a huge gap. We have more and more of those students in our community who have nowhere to go.
Nadine Rohe. People in activity centres and alternative education need better access to specialist help and to mentors who can work with them and their families. Sala Tiatia from Te Ora Hou in Christchurch says it's getting harder to meet the needs of teenagers who've been kicked out of school, and activity centres need a lot more help than they're getting.
There's more need for either a good youth worker, a mentor, a social worker, a nurse, a doctor, a dietitian, a nutritionist, which are hats that a lot of staff members that work in that space have to wear. And we're not even qualified, but yet we've been bearing that brunt for the last 30 years.
Joe Graham from the National Body for Alternative Education says whatever funding increase the sector might get as a result of today's meeting, the payoff for society will be a lot bigger.
Well, if we can get this right, then it means that a young person that is disengaged from mainstream education doesn't actually mean that they're going to fall out of society as a whole. So I think that's going to be a big difference for our society as a whole, because if we don't get them on the right pathway, if they go into the prison system or into those areas, are a lot higher than if we can get them into a positive pathway.
Tracy Martin has assured the sector the government wants to help, and she'll develop a plan this year for potential funding in next year's budget. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Prepare for rain, wind and cold temperatures. That is the message from Met Service for this weekend. Met Service has issued a severe weather warning for Northland, and the rest of the country has been told to brace itself for a big drop in temperatures and gales over the next 2 days. Sounds charming. Rachel Graham has more.
The first sign of the wet weather was felt in Northland after weeks of dry conditions. Federated Farmers Northland President John Blackwell, who runs a sheep and beef farm in Ōkahu, says the light rain was a welcome relief.
Yeah, I've been running around it. My clothes are all wet and damp now, but it's slowly getting heavier, yes. So I'm not. It's actually quite nice working in the rain.
The rain is forecast to continue in Northland up until midnight tonight, with up to 100 millimetres expected in the region, some of that likely to reach Auckland. Met Service meteorologist Rob Kerr says almost all of the country will be affected by cooler and wetter weather, with eastern areas bearing the brunt of it. He's warning people to prepare for a big drop in temperature over the weekend.
So we're looking at the likes of Christchurch hitting a maximum of 28 today, and maybe only a maximum of 15 on Sunday. Similar story for Napier Hastings today, 30 degrees, and then on Monday only sort of 18, and then a similar story further north. So places that are in high 20s today, as we go through the weekend, will struggle to get past that 20-degree mark.
He says the worst of the weather will be on Sunday, which may affect many outdoor events planned for this weekend. The Auckland Central Masters Harbour Swim, planned for Sunday, has already been cancelled, along with an outdoor cinema event at Auckland's Silo Park. In Christchurch, the organisers of the Lantern Festival, which runs from tonight to Sunday night, say they are monitoring the situation. On Saturday night, Christchurch's Hagley Park will play host to Electric Avenue Music Festival. Marketing manager Claire Steele says they're not deterred by the forecast.
Our stages are all wind rated and we keep a really close eye on that during the festival. So we certainly haven't seen anything in the forecast that's giving us any cause for alarm. We're just telling our customers the same as we would do if it was going to be a stinking hot day. Just dress appropriately, bring a hat and sunglasses, maybe bring a rain jacket for later on in the evening and come ready to party.
Other outdoor events on this weekend include 660 playing to a sold-out crowd in Auckland, Te Matatini Festival in Wellington and Wings over Wairarapa in Masterton. On the west coast, a heavy burst of rain last night brought down a massive slip, which is now blocking State Highway 6, the main access to Fox and Franz Josef glaciers. 178 millimetres of rain fell in a short time, bringing down an estimated 50,000 cubic metres of gravel and trees across the road. The road is not expected to open until at least Monday next week, adding an extra 3 hours drive for anyone heading from Christchurch to the glaciers. Nelson, one area that's in desperate need of moisture, is unfortunately not in line for much rain. The majority of it is expected in the Kaikoura Ranges. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
When kapa haka performers say it takes blood, sweat and tears to reach the national stage, they mean it. And despite Wellington putting on cooler weather for the second day of the world's largest kapa haka festival, the crowd continued to swell. Our reporter Te Aniwa Hurahanganui is at the festival and has been talking to performers who say they were pushed to their limits in the lead up to Te Matatini.
It's day 2 of Te Matatini, and many performers who've already taken to the stage are feeling relieved. Te Rainga Morehu o Rātana were the first group to perform, and one of its members, Te Rā Kino, says the feeling on stage was indescribable.
We actually got told before we went on stage not to take any notice of the crowd, just to feel their energy. So in practices we'd be told you give it 99.7%, and then that 0.3% comes from the energy of the crowd. It's overwhelming really. It's like, wow, we've done it. It's so surreal that what I've done is like, with all these months have been preparing for that moment and now we've just done it.
But behind the scenes, the group's routine took time and hard work to perfect. Ms Kino says the group was pushed to breaking point.
There is literal tears. Our tutor have told us, we're going to push you to your breaking point, and a lot of us did break, but it's important that we did break because then we can start growing.
What do you mean by push to your breaking point? What does that look like?
You're committed to it physically, mentally and spiritually, and you're just fatigued, you're tired, your mind's not working, you just want to go home, you're hungry, it's 2 in the morning and you have to do the whakeke again, handi as, you just have to dig deep. It's that digging and just grabbing it from in your stomach and giving it heaps still.
19-year-old Kiri Waitangi Rei performed yesterday for Tūhourangi Ngāti Wahiao. She and her rōpū started training for Te Matatini more than 3 months ago.
At the beginning of the campaign we were practising fortnightly, and it wasn't until the beginning of this year that we started practising on Friday nights from 6 p.m. till 10 p.m. and then again on the weekend from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. But yes, I did see quite a few tears throughout the campaign this year, especially when a lot of the performers travel far distances to come to practice and sometimes things don't pan out, but I guess that's what you have to do for kapa haka nowadays.
Kiri Waitangi Rei's day job is performing haka for tourists to Rotorua, but she says nothing can compare to standing on the Matatini stage at Westpac Stadium.
After that exit I was so exhausted, but I was relieved that it was over. Everyone was on such a good vibe. When you're performing on stage and you feel the crowd enjoyed it as well, they really amp you up as well.
Thousands poured into the stadium today to witness another 15 rōpū perform. Among them were members of Te Rōpū Manaaki, an intellectually disabled kapa haka group from the Wairarapa, who were gifted free tickets to the event. Their kaitātaki wahine, Faith Cornea, says being at Te Matatini is a dream come true.
Oh, excited. It's like freaking out actually. First time I've actually seen live kapahaka and to actually see my idols and actually to be inspired will be really cool to watch.
The group's male leader, Caleb McNamara, says he's excited to learn from the best.
This has been a dream of mine since I was a little fella, actually. It's like, wow. I'm looking forward to seeing a few groups like Ngāti Manakwa so I can get better on the marako and doing my mihi.
While spectators get set for another big day tomorrow, performers Te Rā and Kiri Waitangi are hoping they will be named in the top 9 on Saturday night. If they have, they'll get one more chance to shine on stage and impress the judges on Sunday. No te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
And time for a little bit of feedback before we go. On our earlier story about Doreen, who's 81 years old and found herself in a guest house, a boarding house, that was suggested to her by Work and Income. She is homeless otherwise and has been living in her car on and off. This person says, my heart goes out to Doreen and all in her situation. If I had my own home, I would welcome her to live with me. However, not far behind her, as also living on super of $400 a week, paying rent, which takes $300 of that, and the last dregs of KiwiSaver. Liz says, Doreen's story breaks my heart. I cried. At 57 and going to be a renter for life, as I can't afford to buy a home, I am terrified of ending up like Doreen. Where is the compassion and care for our elderly, says Liz. And this person says the story about Doreen is shocking. The woman who just spoke in defence of her company sounded atrocious. And they say, Doreen can come and have dinner at mine tomorrow night and sleep on the couch if she likes. Thank you very much for your kindness and for tuning in. And we'll be back next week.
News headlines at 6:30. The man found guilty of murdering Susan Burdett says the jury did not take long enough on its verdict. Lime Scooters is apologising to Auckland riders after a brake malfunction caused injuries and the suspension of the scooter service from this afternoon. The visiting Australian Prime Minister has again knocked back New Zealand's offer to resettle refugees and asylum seekers being held in offshore detention centres. And the family of the British teenager who joined Islamic State in Syria has appealed directly to the British government to be allowed to bring her newborn son to London. Our next news and weather will be at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
The current system benefits wealthier New Zealanders because people are taxed much more heavily on labour.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
If you're on the same income, you get taxed the same amount as far as possible.